human remains at that other site, just on the 15th of May. And I'm going to introduce everyone here at the front, and several of the folks in the audience here are important. Our university president is here, Barbara Latier. And I don't know if Barbara, you'd like to come on up and do a little...
Nope. Take it away, Bill.
Take
it away, Bill.
The university has been solidly behind this work as far back as when we were just beginning to work at Duffy Scott to try to get the historical marker out on King Road. And very few people outside of the university believed that we could do what we eventually were able to achieve out there after the marker, then the finding of remains. And we got a nice little museum here that's open for everyone to observe after the event here. But I want to introduce everybody who's here at the front, and some folks in the seats here. So to my far left here is Dr. Matt Patterson. He's our forensic specialist. And so he examined the human remains and of course determined them to be human, but was with us as far back as the beginning days of the cut as well. And so he has an expertise that's really important here. And I'll let him answer any questions you guys may have about the forensic work. Next to him is Rich Gherkin, who was one of the first students involved in Duffy's Cut back in the beginning. Now he's an archivist with the Archdiocese. Rich Gherkin was here for a very long time at the Cut, and also very faithfully working out at Northwood since we started working there in 2020. And to my immediate left here is Bob Frank, who was one of the original Duffy's Cut interns actually through the university. Got a SEPG grant to work with us one summer, I guess that was 2009. Yeah. And became an IT specialist, and he's now up at LaSalle, but comes out very, very often to assist us at Northwood. And so you got here the next generation, if you will, of researchers in Irish Railroad lore. To my immediate right is my brother Frank Watson, Reverend Dr. Frank Watson, who is an archivist with the New Jersey Synod of the Lutheran Church, and also one of the founders, the initiators of this thing. To his right is Matt Peace, who is our radar specialist and archaeologist. And Matt is the guy who found the X on the map. X marks the spot kind of moment for us on the 27th of April of this year, in an area that until very recently was very heavily vegetated and we couldn't get to. Matt found something that then on the 15th with Bob McAllister on the right here, we were able to find. Bob was with us in the days when we were beginning to try to get a momentum moving towards the historical marker in the Chester County Emerald Society. He's a police officer, someone who was important for paving the way with the officials in Chester County here, getting the support we needed for everything, including the permissions at Duffy's Cut back in the day, and it was there with us on the day that we found the remains. It was, we have a team here that was able to pull something together that's kind of, an archaeologist and a historian's dream. We were able to do it not only at the Cut, but out at Northwood. It's only the beginning at Northwood, of course. I want to introduce other people in the audience here. First, in the front row on our immediate left here is the head of the Sons of Union Veterans, Jim Lawler, who also believed in us throughout the years. The immediate row behind Jim is Phil Daig and Jim Sundman. And so they represent Downingtown. And Jim is the president currently of the Downingtown Historical Society. Phil is the mayor of Downingtown. So he's Mr. Downingtown. And,
Literally.
The idea that Downingtown and East Whiteland are interconnected, through the activities of Irish railroaders of the previous generation is something that's important to keep in mind, that these places are linked together. Whereas one of the guys from Duffy's Cut didn't die at Duffy's Cut. He ran down to Northwood, the site actually south of Northwood along the tracks in Downingtown, and infected another crew. And some of those guys out there, just like at the Cut, probably died of cholera, but some of those guys also, we believe, died of not natural causes out at Downingtown. Immediately behind that row, we've got our counsel, Don Gimbel, who has helped the liaison also with Locust Lane Brewery. To his immediate right, to my left, is Tom Arnold, who's the owner and the brewer of Locust Lane Brewery, who's come up with a Duffy's Cut beer, which you can sample over here, and which they're kind enough to give us a little proceeds after sales of that beer to help us fund our work. There's a lot of other people here. I know Carlos Zambelli is a local resident who's also believed in us over the years. Lori Monk in the rear here is our webmaster and our Duffy's Cut accountant. So I want to thank everybody for being here. And without further ado, I'll just throw it open to everybody else to see. Oh, is Matt Gordon here? I guess he's not.
I don't think so.
We have our liaison with the coroner and the district attorney is Chief Matt Gordon from Kennett. I guess he's not with us at this moment. But I want to thank everyone else for being here. And maybe throw it open to any questions you guys may have. How we found this site. I mean, there was a letter that came out of the blue in 2004 from a guy named Vance Usher. Came to the office here, and he said that he knew from reading about the Duffy's Cut story that we were interested in Irish railroader stories, and that there was a site similar to Duffy's Cut in Downingtown. And he sent us a copy of Pennypacker's History of Downingtown, 1909, that has details of the burial of a group of Irish railroaders who were carried up north from the track line, who died under similar circumstances as the dead at Duffy's Cut. And so we knew about this in '04, but we couldn't really act on it until.
Well, we did meet with the Northwood Cemetery Board in 2006. My brother and I, Bill and I, met with the board because we knew this story was connected to Duffy's Cut, and we hadn't found a grave at Duffy's Cut yet, but we knew that there was a link with Northwood. So starting in 2006, we started germinating ideas of what would happen after we found the remains at Duffy's Cut. And so, the board at Northwood Cemetery has been incredibly supportive, and this couldn't have happened without them. And the reality is that they cleared a patch of ground that we had been searching through the cemetery for a number of years now. And Matt Peace, our radar guy, had checked out all the cemetery except this one section that matches the 1909 Pennypacker piece, that it was on the eastern side of the cemetery.
Not too much.
Yes,
Yeah, secure the site.
but the bottom, yes, of course, I'm just saying that, all right, nothing else. But Matt found a spot, and it was an X marks the spot type experience like we had at Duffy's Cut.
So cool.
We all know that. And he said, go in with shovels and trowels, and lo and behold, on the 15th of May, boom.
And a sifter.
And the sifter.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so Bob McAllister, Bill and I were there working, and we didn't know what we were gonna find, but lo and behold, Matt Peace's X marks the spot brought us to the announcement today that we found the first, part of the first remains at Northwood Cemetery. And we have a whole slew of contextual evidence that shows us that these folks were the Irish crew that was working at mile 48 of the railroad. And anyway, we're gonna have more on that.
And it's not actually it's not in this spot in the cemetery where there are normal burials. Okay, so it's cemetery property, but not in the cemetery.
Yes, it's not in the cemetery proper. Question over here.
So, last time you sent remains out for DNA testing. How long do you think that will take, and do you think you'll be able to track it back to ancestors in Ireland the way you did last time?
We hope that this can happen. The thing is, that what we were able to do in the case of two of the Duffy's Cut individuals, the age of the individual that was ascertained by the physical anthropologist. And then, look at the ship list, look at the names. There's no one else who could have been buried there at that spot at that time in the fill, which didn't predate their presence at the spot. And gender, yeah.
Yes.
But the cost of the DNA, we thought it was $1,000 per sample. It's $10,000 per sample.
Oh,
So
well, we
weren't
need to
able
do a
the
little
DNA.
fundraising for you.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's way
Yeah.
beyond our
Lovely.
means.
You know what I mean? And our specialist here, Matt Patterson, will be the guy to address, how that's done.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Would you like me to address?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, there are several kinds of DNA. There's nuclear DNA, which of course is found in the nucleus of a cell. There's mitochondrial DNA, which is found in teeth. Mitochondrial DNA runs only in the lines of the female. Okay, so so you can trace it back along matrilineal lines, but you can't trace it back through the father. Anyway, It's a little more complex than, what's the big company, 23andMe?
Well, Ancestry.com, because one of them recently kind of went belly up.
Somebody folded, right.
23andMe folded.
Okay. So, so it's a little tricky to get a reputable lab. I've talked with the Pennsylvania State Police Lab, and there's nobody left to prosecute, even though it's a crime scene. So they're like, no, we have a limited budget and limited time, so, you know, peddle your wares somewhere else. And I talked with University of North Texas. Interestingly enough, I recover and identify bodies from people who have tried to cross the border but who haven't made it. I would think a place in South Texas would be more likely to do that, but this was University of North Texas, and they're swamped. They love what we're doing, but they don't have it. We talked with a researcher in Ireland who identified Thomas Kent, one of the participants in the Easter Rising, through a new technique where they use the petrous portion of the temporal bone of the head, and we have heads. So that looked promising, but that's where the pricing was just way out of our means, and so we're still trying to get the money together to have a reputable lab take our DNA.
Because when I first met Dr. Watson, he told me someday they were going out to Downingtown. And he also laughed because I had an American-born Irish grandfather who told me about Duffy's cut. And I forget if it was 7th or 8th grade, and the history teacher said, no such thing happened. And my grandfather said, yes, it did happen. And I guess he would know because my great-grandmother, his mother, Rebecca Nesbitt Gallen, was the summer housekeeper to the Cassatt family on what people now know as where Marion Cricket Club is.
Yeah.
So people that were in service in some regard, a lot of this was, I guess, passed down, you know, and now you've made it happen. Again.
Well, you know, if it wasn't for Duffy's cut, Northwood, the discovery at Northwood wouldn't have happened, you know, from our end of things. So,
And that's a cool cemetery anyway.
yes, it is. A lot of history in there. That's the thing, because of what we were able to do at Duffy's cut, we were then able to translate that, the abilities of digging and using ground penetrating radar and so forth. It allowed us to use the same tools in a different environment, and because Northwood is a different environment, you know, there's a cemetery.
It's 10 times bigger than the cut.
Yes.
And
So,
yeah, and I mean, there's, you know, the thing is that our area around here has lots of mass casualty sites. There's Radnor Paper Mill House, commoners, you know, people who are just not included in the narrative of history for the most part. But the Radnor Paper Mill House off of Route 252, an unknown number of Hungarian workers died there around 1910 of diphtheria. We actually got a request to go check that area out. I'd say this is about 10 years ago. Who knows, down the line, maybe we can actually do a thorough investigation of the area, but there were workers who died there and are buried anonymously, like at the cut. They're not Irish, they're Hungarian, but there's an Italian fireworks factory explosion, Westover Park in Devon.
Really?
Yeah, people died in a mass casualty experience there, and never been any archaeology. It's a bird sanctuary now. But all up and down the East Coast, there are these huge numbers of anonymous dead. Between the New Orleans Canal and the Erie Canal and everything in between, including Duffy's Cut and Northwood, I counted about 15,000 Irish dead buried in mass graves in the 1820s and the 1830s. There are mass casualty sites beneath our feet, and Bob just whispered in my ear a moment ago, the Battle of the Clouds.
Yep.
Here on this campus, American Patriot dead.
So beyond that, though, there are, you know, early industrial America didn't just use Irish as it did primarily on the East Coast, but you think of earlier, you know, and later, there are all sorts of mass graves of folks who were buried anonymously. And we know that this technology and the combining of archival and historical research, science, and hard digging, you know, can bring some of these stories to light. And so we hope to continue this in other venues. When we first made the discovery at Duffy's Cut, the first grave we found, we had emails coming to us from all over the world from folks looking to find deceased ancestors or loved ones. And what this shows here at Northwood is that this can be carried on in other sites and other places around this country and even around the world where people want these stories told and folks who can be remembered.
My last question, and then I'll leave you alone, well, for now. What would you have to say as a message to donors who have the spare change to make this happen?
Well, they can help us recover lost history and people's lives ground under this huge process of modernization. There's a lot at stake here, really. Every single day that a site gets plowed over. I'm thinking of the place on 252 in Berwyn. What was the name of that spot? That was another letter came out of the blue that there was likely later Irish 1850s era Irish railroaders, Howellville, that's what it's called. And I mean, now we can't do anything because it's a walking trail, which is a nice thing to have happen.
It's a beautiful
but it's
area.
Tragic that history is
Well,
disappearing.
You're literally
It's-
walking
And from
over
the
graves.
perspective of the Emerald Society, the police who helped us in the beginning, there's the justice aspect of this thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, you can't get over the fact as you're involved in this, as you're actually digging in the ground and recovering human remains, your thought is, this is a soul, this is somebody's life. This is a human being that we're extracting from the ground, it's not lost on you when you're doing that.
No,
Everybody deserves to be remembered.
Yes.
We said this when we were recovering the remains. We don't know much about the stories of these Irishmen who were recovered and the woman who was recovered at Duffy's Cut. Just that they were murdered, they were buried in anonymous graves, and their stories need to be told to illumine our own history, to right a historic wrong. That people have a right to be remembered by those who are.
they came here for a better life.
Yeah, we're obviously, we benefit from advances in technology and the Industrial Revolution. Our lives are easier in a lot of ways than our ancestors, but it's progress at a great price. This illustrates the seamy underbelly of the Industrial Revolution to a huge degree. And it's just every bit as legitimate a piece of history as the rich and famous.
Correct.
Can I add one thing, Bill? I'm just flashing back to the burial of John Ruddy in Ireland and in 2013. And they say history is the story of people. And I'm a science guy, but that meant that point was driven home to me when we buried John Ruddy in Ardara, and people came from. They didn't come on super highways. They came from these tiny, squiggly little roads up and down and all around, all over Donegal. And so many said, thank you for what you're doing for our boys. And one lady said to me, I can't imagine the mothers who sent their sons over and never heard from them again. And to even to their great descendants, it means a lot. People drove from everywhere to find out what happened to this one guy and to find out his story.
So the interesting thing, Matt really hits a point, because when we were there in 2013, we had families of the disappeared who were with us. That is, those in Ireland who died in the Troubles, on the wrong side of political divides and whatever, and they were literally disappeared. And there was an effort to recover these remains in Ireland and on the continent, actually, too. And we found, you remember, they told us they found
Seamus Ruddy.
Yeah, they found Seamus Ruddy was one of the
in
disappeared.
France.
And they told us that it's because of the work that we were doing that they used our process. the process with science and archives and history and physical digging, they used our process, our model, so to speak, to help find a number of the disappeared. It took our breath, right, man, it took our breath away.
Oh my gosh,
Tears
yeah.
were rolling down
The
faces.
sister of one of the disappeared, Seamus Reddy's sister, Ann Reddy, came to our reburial of John Reddy and said this is its home, obviously a distant relative, you know, in the Reddy family from Donegal. But yeah, history's alive. I mean, it's never dead. You know, that the quote that is often attributed to Faulkner, you know, past isn't the past. It's not even, you know, whatever, not even gone or whatever. It's not, the past is with us. It's in our DNA. You know, and so that the people who, there are living descendants of the folks from Duffy's Cut, living descendants of the folks from the Northwood site out in Downingtown, who might someday in the near future find that the life story of their long lost ancestors finally told.
So one of the things we want to do, we're going to do as much of the recovery as possible, like we did at Duffy's Cut, but we'd also like to put a memorial cross at Northwood Cemetery to remember those who have died and were buried there on this Irish work crew from 1832. So that's part of the plan too. It's not just the DNA, but we want to remember at this physical site that this is where this Irish work crew lived. They're buried in this cemetery, what became a cemetery. It wasn't a cemetery when they were buried there. That's highly significant. There were no other burials there.
Yeah, so the families that owned, how they ended up where they are, is the families that owned the land adjacent to the railroad all along the 82-mile stretch of the Philadelphia and Columbia Railroad, that's the railroad we're talking about here, 1832, had to sign something with the state saying that they agreed to put up a fence near the track line, you know, to protect state property, protect their own property from workers. Anyway, the same families who lived in that area 40 years later, after the incident of the cholera epidemic in 1832, they decided to turn that spot into a cemetery because they couldn't you know, plant crops in a spot where there might be a heck of a lot of bodies. There could be as many as 100 sets of remains, up to 120 sets of remains out in Northwood. So they decided to make a cemetery. And the point with the Potter's Field, Frank mentioned, is that this is, there's a regular Potter's Field that's on the maps for Northwood, but where we found these remains is beyond that. It's just above Norwood House Road. I'm not gonna say exactly where,
We
it's
can't
not a
swear,
good site,
yes, right.
but it is a spot that we've been looking for, and we only saw, my goodness, you know, on the 27th.
Why don't we let Pat Pease
Yeah.
describe what
Describe.
he did?
Yeah.
Describe.
Well, I mean, really, it was just using the ground penetrating radar. We did just a small scan. It is a very difficult area. Its elevation is very steep. But we were able just to notice that there were some disturbances near the surface. We can see that there was things that have been changing. The radar works by looking for things that are different. So in this case, in soil, any kind of hole that you dig and then backfill, even if it's been 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 years ago, that changes forever, and then we're looking for those kind of changes, those differences in the soil.
And it was, I mean, it really, it was incredible. It's just 2 weeks later or so, you know, Bob had the golden shovel that day, put it right in the sifter, and holy cow.
We looked in the sifter and there were, how many, Matt? What are there, 20 bones or something like that? How many bones?
That's
Little
crazy.
fragments.
Oh, I didn't count all the fragments. There were a lot of them. That's not very scientific to say a lot of them, but there were a lot of fragments, and they will be counted because I still have to separate them because there are little stones. There are pieces of wood that actually can look like human remains. So I have to separate them all out, but there were quite a few pieces that actually were human remains. There is an L-shaped piece that's part of a human mandible. There are 2 teeth that are absolutely human teeth. So these are human remains, and yes, ma'am.
Oh, I was just curious, were they sort of buried in like a mass grave kind of thing? They were just, it sounds like with Pennypacker, they were just sort of carted up to this area. And actually, I didn't think Norwood was an active cemetery. I know there was the remains of a black church there in,
That's behind, yeah,
Yeah.
that's behind what the current
and
cemetery.
many Civil War, but it seemed to have not been active for a while with the Civil War colored soldiers there too, as they said, the colored unit. But anyway, were they sort of like mass buriers, this buried?
We believe there will be multiple bodies there, yes, or multiple sets of remains, they won't be intact bodies, of course.
But it is an interesting site, because you had what became several different cemeteries in the vicinity.
Yeah.
And the fact that this was established, that these were established after a mass burial, 30, 40 years before, it's fascinating. There couldn't have been a whole lot of work there otherwise, because they knew there were bodies buried somewhere in that ground.
Yeah, and the
What was
caretaker.
30 or 40 years prior?
Yes,
Yeah.
well, that's this,
Yeah.
that's, so.
Yeah, but the interesting thing too is the caretaker prior to the current one, his name is Ron Sealan, he told us, I think he was there decades, in the job, in a house that's just below the cemetery, said that he knew that there were bodies of Irish railroaders buried within the cemetery property, below the current cemetery, exactly where we found these guys. But it was so thickly vegetated, not until April 27th of this year do we have any opportunity to actually look in there. If they hadn't done that maintenance work, we never would have found these.
So that's the thing, because for several years, we had been looking throughout the confines of the cemetery, different sections and so on, and Rich and Bob Frank here, Rich Gerken and Bob Frank, we were in, who had the photo? I was on a.
No, he was down there trying to get a boulder about the size of this.
No. Somebody had the photo. I was on the bucket of the earth mover.
Oh, that was a common occurrence.
So we were down in these various holes that were deeper than, we were looking up at the top. But the thing is that other anomalies show different things that they were very different in appearance, right? Very different in appearance. So we had to rule out, it's like at Duffy's Cut, we had to rule out whole sections of the area that is now known as, well, even then was known as Duffy's Cut, before we found the burials at Duffy's Cut.
But
And
again, this
same
place
thing
is
here.
10 times bigger than the
Yes,
cut,
yes.
as long as it took us to go. This was the luck of the draw. Matt got that reading at that spot.
And the other map was able to confirm that they're human bones and so forth, so, Matt's and Bob's helped to and Rich, and they helped to make all this possible,
Yeah.
so.
Where did you get the idea or story that somebody from Duffy's Cut went there?
No, that's in the 1832 Village Record, November 7th. Talks about a man who ran west, escaping from Duffy's Cut.
Oh, escaping the.
Yeah, to the East Bradford, East Column line. Actually, we have a map here.
We have a couple maps
That's
that show you.
that's a map from the around 1872, 73 time
And this
frame when
is
the cemetery was
1880.
created. So, the Village Record said that one guy ran west, escaped from Duffy's Cut to what we presume another, he knew where he was going, to another Irish railroader crew, mile 48. So it's 11 miles west of Duffy's Cut. You get to Downingtown, Northwood area. And that group of railroaders also got infected.
And that they all died. See, the record says that they all died, and that's significant. It's only 50% of a
that's not
population.
the newspaper piece actually,
Yeah.
says, that a number of people died. We're downplaying
Yes.
it. And it wasn't until you get to Pennypacker where he says that the old tradition that there was a cemetery at Northwood previous to the present one is incorrect. A number of persons, however, were buried there, especially the bodies of certain Irish laborers who died of cholera during the epidemic of 1832.
Which is an entire,
They were
basically an
employed on the
entire work.
Pennsylvania Railroad and their homes were unknown. The last sentence, I won't read, because that is the geographical determinator of how we got
Yes,
here.
and that matches the 1832 Village Record. So those two sources gave us a general vicinity. And there's a little further qualifier there, which we're not gonna talk about just yet, because we don't want everybody traipsing over the ground, that shows a very specific geographical feature that was only made visible recently. Let's just put it that way. Can't say anything
up,
more.
Frankie.
So it's all these things came together for, yes, we're twins.
He's
So-
gonna
So.
Yeah, I think we
so-
put Bob in
so
between
it's like this silly putty that comes together and puts a stamp down. Oh, that's what it says.
No.
So
Now,
it's
the thing
kinda,
is,
you know,
the irony though, again, we knew this from 2004.
Yes.
And we couldn't get to work on this really concentrating our efforts on this until 2020. And so it's been 5 years, you know, since we started working there, till we found this. And it's about the same length of time as we spent at Duffy's Cut before we found the first remains, from 04 to 09. I don't know what's up with that year, 5-year mark.
I know.
But, I mean, there's a lot of, let's put it this way, there's a lot of persistence involved in both of these things. You know, we weren't gonna stop until we found something. There was science involved in it, you know, thankfully, and a hell of a lot of luck. I mean, in both cases, it took luck to find these.
In
mass
reading the
graves.
sources, being able to determine what was in the sources.
It was
you
luck,
know,
Frankie.
Well, of course
If
it
you're
was
1
luck.
inch away, you could be here and it's over here.
But we
And an inch
we
would be a
wouldn't have
mile.
looked at that inch without the sources. I'm not gonna say anything else, but without the sources,
He's
we
gonna
would
put a
not
muzzle on
have.
him.
I'm an archivist, so what can I say? So we had another question?
Yeah, my question was, are you of Irish descent, or how did you start on this journey in the first place?
Yeah, we're of Irish
Yeah,
descent. yeah.
our grandmother was Jane Donnelly, and they were from Donegal.
So we're
So
members
we're-
of the Friendly Sons and Daughters of St. Patrick.
This is
and
Donegal,
all-
sorry.
So, yeah, so we're bagpipers for the Friendly Sons and Daughters and,
Several of us in
yes.
Legion are Hibernians who are Catholic.
And, but it's an interesting thing because it really connects up with all of us that have some sort of Irish, we all have Irish ancestry, you know, so that's the reality, so yes.
I mean, it really is kind of, you know, again, it's just the beginning of this thing. But I expect we're gonna find a lot more out there.
It connects up, I will say, the Irishness within us connects up with what we're discovering, it really does. It's like, these could have been our great-grandfathers or great-great.
Was it your idea or your brother's idea? Like, how did you first decide
Well,
to look at
Norfolk
Duffy's?
came through a letter in the mail.
But when you first started back
Well,
in
we
the 2000s.
we were at my house in Freehold, New Jersey, and we were sharing our grandfather's railroad papers, and I brought out the Duffy's Cut file that I'd inherited. And he had a whole bunch of other records from our grandfather's work on the railroad, and we just said, let's do this out of interest for our grandfather's story, and his, you know, he told us the story when we were little boys. And it was a ghost story that was part of it that kind of hooked us.
Well, that was it derived to get the marker, and then
Yeah.
the Emerald Society came in, and without the Emerald Society,
Yes.
we wouldn't have gotten that mark, so.
That's a good question.
Is the railroad, that's the Pennsylvania Railroad now, is that in about the same place as your?
In
back
several
then,
spots it is,
or-
in Downingtown it hasn't changed.
Okay.
The 1832 line became the Pennsylvania Railroad line, and it's basically, the station is about the same spot as it was back then. Of course, they
Duffy's
couldn't
Cut
bury
was a
them.
little further
They-
south.
They couldn't,
Ohio.
yeah, Amtrak, you know, but they couldn't bury them down there, cause there was no fill, so they had to be dragged north of the track line. There was at the cut, they could bury them right in the fill, because there was all this ample supply of dirt. But, yeah, I mean, I expect there are other spots too along the line where we would find graves of the same type.
Now,
An estimate of between 100 and 120 people maybe at Northwood.
Yeah.
How did you arrive at?
Well, the
that?
typical size of a work crew is 100 to 120 guys. And,
Yeah, so-
and so, yeah, Duffy had lost half of his crew, 57, you know, it's close to 60. And so, everything seems to indicate out in Northwood that the entire, you know, mile 48 that the group.
Because that's the thing,
entirely was lost.
the records from Duffy's Cut said half of his work crew died. So, and that.
And it's a known fact that
Yeah.
the typical work crew on a mile is about 100 to 120 guys.
Mhm.
So,
Question?
No, just, do you have a message for the erstwhile ghost hunters that made things hard last time? Because they really need to respect the site this time.
yeah, so here, yeah, this is, of
100%.
course, this place is a cemetery, of course, you know, and there's gonna be lots of readings, maybe more than a ghost hunter could possibly deal with in a place like Northwood. But no, I mean, it's a place of remembrance, it's a sacred place, and no one should be there trying to find anything with the supernatural when we've actually found it with science.
Because that's the thing, the ground is, you know, it's consecrated by the burials that have been done there, and people really shouldn't
Yeah.
play at those things, you know, because it desecrates the sun, you know, the nature of this place of rest. I mean, I don't know, I mean, people do things like that, and at Duffy's Cut, we sensed, after we started finding bodies, that there was a different feel in the valley at Duffy's Cut. At North, am I right?
Oh, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
So at Northwood, I mean, I don't even know how to describe it. We started finding bones the last month. It was just like,
Here's the thing though,
it's
so
like,
we
all of a
felt,
sudden, here we are.
we
again.
felt at the cut, it was a lot more intense, it was smaller of an area, we knew pretty early on that it was somewhere within the fill. Private property, people could trespass, you know, unfortunately, some of those ghost hunters did. But at Northwood, we didn't feel anything until the 27th of April. And I don't think any ghost hunter's gonna feel anything there either if we didn't.
I don't, there's just a feeling. I told you I felt it when I realized Ebenezer on Backton Hill Road was actually the remains of a very early AME church and burial ground.
Is that the one that is the one behind the Northwood Cemetery?
No, it's on Backton Hill Road in East Whiteland in Fraser.
Okay.
It's the one where they're building all the McMansions around it that has the remains of the church. I thought it was a farmhouse. And
Have they built around onto the cemetery ground?
no, the AME church still owns it, and that was proven by an ancient 19th century deed finally. And East Whiteland put up a historical marker almost 2 years ago now, maybe about that.
That's a very good thing.
And it's just, I remember when I realized what it was, and I have no ancestors there, but you could feel it. It was like, it's the weirdest thing. And I felt it when you took me out, Dr. Watson, all those years ago. It's just this, it's inexplicable. Maybe it's my Irish being Fey, but you almost feel, it's like peace and gratitude that people realize that they're there. And I don't know how to articulate it any better.
I think in Northwood last month, it was like it was relief, because, and we kind of felt that at Duffy's Cut too, just a sense of relief that the story that, we've been piecing together is true, that there's a reality to it. And that's really kind of what, we've been talking about Northwood for years, and we've been investigating it, and then it was just holding what felt like bones, and Matt has shown definitively were human remains. There is a different feel to the place, and
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like the enormity of the tragedy there. Of course, there was a whole Potter's Field within the cemetery. It was hard to have any feeling at all except being overwhelmed. And I didn't think we were ever gonna find anything out of Northwood. It's a miracle. I mean, and Phil is the mayor of Downingtown. We should actually have him. Would you like to address the folks on behalf of the people of Downingtown? Because a part of your history is now.
Well, I'm really interested in hearing what you guys have to say, but just speaking for I have a question though. When you find bones like that, even though you know that the bones are well over a century old, is there any legal obligation to notify authorities?
Yeah, so that's Bob's.
Yeah, we're required, actually one of our members of the Emerald Society, he couldn't be here today, his name is Matt Gordon. He's been an Emerald Society guy forever, and he's now the chief of Kennett Township. But if you find human remains anywhere, if you find them, what you think is human remains in your backyard, you're required to notify, your local police department. They'll then notify the district attorney's office and the coroner. In this case, the coroner wasn't really necessary to contact because of the nature of it. It wasn't, there probably wasn't an ongoing criminal investigation. But the DA's office has to look at it, examine it, and say, yeah, you're good, go on with it. So that's what we do.
Yes, Bob and Matt have given the imprimatur to go ahead with this. So that's excellent.
Well, I've been, I'll say it, I'm a fan of your guys for a couple decades now, and was thrilled when you came out to the Downingtown Historical Society on a couple occasions to tell us about Duffy's Cut. And as you've mentioned several times here, it is a crime. It's a crime. It's history, but crimes were committed, and I think that there's no statute of limitations on that, of finding the answers. And I applaud what you're doing. And as you mentioned earlier, the families, I must be so grateful. And Catherine Burns and John Ruddy, their families can go visit their graves in Ireland now, and others can go visit the graves at Laurel Hill Cemetery now. And that's you can't put a dollar value on that. That's tremendous, and I applaud you for that of anything. Another thing is I hate mysteries, things that I'm going to go to my grave someday not knowing. I figure I may never know what really happened to Jimmy Hoffa or the Donner Party or whatever.
I'll tell you, I live in Jersey, I'll tell you what happened to Hoffa.
But thankfully, we have a couple less mysteries here, and I'm really going to be paying keen attention to this one as it unfolds. And what better way to hide? I understand there's parts of the Duffy's Cut that you couldn't get to because you think there might be something that's underneath Amtrak property or the tracks.
Yeah.
And what better way to hide, something like that, like maybe, you know.
Build over it.
Don't cut that section of the lawn anymore, let some trees grow up, you know.
Right.
and-
It's
I
a
mean,
miracle.
The idea of a cover-up
Yeah, it's
runs
going-
pretty deep with this, with the
Oh,
railroad.
yes, because we
you
know, well, we're not gonna say too much now, but we know there's very clear evidence that there's gonna be violence involved in this.
Yeah, there was a
Can't
group-
say too much now, but there's definitive, yeah.
There's a group out here, of course, in the story of Duffy's Cut called the East Whiteland Horse Company, which we believe had something to do with the demise of the men at mile 59. But out in mile 48 in Downingtown at that time, there was something called the Chester County Vigilance Committee, whose head in 1831, 1832 was the physician who was called upon by the railroad to create a so-called hospital at Duffy's Cut, which never actually existed. It was a cover-up. The state paid him $1,033 for his services as a physician, but he was also a contract character. He had a contract with the railroad to provide him with stone and wood out in Mile 48. And so there are several links between Duffy's Cut and the story at Northwood. One is the guy who ran west to there, you know, and infected them from the work crew, and the other one is this Dr. John M. Pugh, I'll say his name. I hope I don't get haunted by him tonight. He was the so-called physician at Duffy's Cut and was the head of the Chester County Vigilance Committee in Downingtown. And they did a lot of the same kinds of things that the horse company did here.
And one of the local power magnates, in this area, let's just say there was a record of criminal activity at this area before, I'm not gonna say anything else.
It was
but-
committed by a local guy against the contractor.
Yeah, a powerful landowner. And so on the memorial cross that we're planning to put up, we're gonna have, one name that we know is the contractor. And his name is gonna go on that, and anonymous workers, you know, railroaders who died. So it's powerful stuff, and there's still more to find, there's still more to tell, more to investigate. But the mystery is starting to open up, so we appreciate that,
Thanks,
that
Phil.
sentiment.
You know, Phil, it's
Thank you.
interesting,
Thank you.
the point you made about the connection between, like, linking these people who were, you know, thrown into a ditch, in, you know, in East Count Township, and their current day, you know, relatives. And the thought of being able to go somewhere and remember this person, and it just, I was part of the 2015 crew that went to Ireland to take Catherine Burns home. And the concept of home with the Irish is so significantly deep. I mean, it's right to the heart. It is with many of us, but to them, I mean, we were there, and the number of people that came up to us at various events that took place when we were there, and just thanked us for bringing her home was really incredible.
Yeah, the priest in Clonell, where we buried her, St. Patrick's in Clonell, that was like his whole homily was, you know, she's home again. You know, our own Catherine is home again, and it kind of blows you away, because we're doing this, you know, there's a sense of justice and honor and dignity, and, you know, to do what's right for this person, but it has much deeper meaning for those folks in Ireland.
And the corporal works of mercy, and this is your area, not mine, but the father who gave that service said that, you know, one of them is to bury the dead, and that's what we were there to do, and it was really, really powerful.
So, and we hope, you know, we do plan on reburying remains that we find back at Northwood. And
Will
doing
be
it with dignity.
examined, you know, by our forensic
Yes.
specialist,
Yes.
and eventually reburied.
With a memorial cross, like we have at
And the
over at
cemetery is
West Laurel
behind
Hill.
it. I mean, the cemetery would, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Approved the whole thing. When I mentioned the board and the current president of the cemetery, Bill Walton and his crew, from the cemetery board who, I mean, way back in 2006 said that we could do this. And only in 2020 did we ever get the chance to actually start it, so.
Time marches on, but justice continues its course to doing what's right. Anyway, question.
Thank you. Yeah, you answered part of my question, which was, what was the ultimate plan? Would the bodies be left, the remains be left in place? And I guess the other question is, can anything be done, or is anything being done to sort of secure or protect the site either right now or in the longer term?
Well, the main thing is that we not reveal where it is. It's, you know, every cemetery, let's put it this way, every cemetery should be gated at night. I don't think any of them are anymore. Not even the Archdiocesan cemeteries.
There are some.
I live near St. Peter and Paul, and for some reason that's open at 10 o'clock at night. But, you know, we'll do whatever we can to secure it. The thing is, what we did is not easy. So I get, if anyone wants to go down there and find them, okay, they can join our team. Nobody's gonna, I don't think anybody's gonna find it, you know, it's like walking into that property.
But it is a concern, and we certainly don't want people trying to willy-nilly dig up
Right.
remains there. You know, because it's illegal to do that anyway. We have permission from the board to do what we're doing. The cemetery give us their blessing to do this. But we certainly discourage anyone from trying to do that, because it's not only against the law, it's immoral.
It's grave robbing. What we're doing is excavation with the permission of the cemetery with scientific assistance.
It's a good question,
To,
excellent question.
We're, you know, with scientific assistance to locate these guys, but it's not grave robbing. You know, it's archaeology in an area that is actually not literally in the confines of the cemetery. It's owned by the cemetery, but they're not being in the bodies.
See, we would call it
You know, other than
recovery.
the railroaders.
We'd call it recovery of remains, right, Matt?
Correct.
Because Matt has been a forensic specialist with the US Navy, identifying remains of sailors and so forth, so you call it recovery, right?
Correct.
Will the police give you trail cams?
Give us what?
Trail cams,
I don't know.
Oh,
Maybe
interesting.
Bob can ask Matt.
because
Gordon.
they have them.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, we're gonna, I think when it comes to that, we'll probably somewhat discreetly post it, at least, no trespassing, so that
Mhm.
anybody who does
Right.
willfully did that.
I just think trail cams, because so many people do that on their properties here anyway,
Yeah.
for hunters that are hunting without permits and licenses.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think one of the drawbacks would be police, like most agencies now, resources are limited, you know.
Question over here?
You had, in one of your books, Dr. Watson, you had talked about how some of the files were burnt down when Philadelphia Railroad was, being dismantled. Do you think that this file of mile 48 was probably in that fire? Because you don't have the names of, the anonymous names of the railway workers?
That was the ideal. I think, yeah, I mean, there was a fire, of course, Broad Street Station, a lot of things got burned. We actually, heard from, Tim Bechtel, who, worked with us at Duffy's Cut, had a student of his go in to work for Amtrak as an archaeologist. Amtrak actually has a series of archaeologists surveying before they put fences in and put rails down. And, in any event, there are documents down at 30th Street that we've never seen.
Mm-hmm.
There is a vault, there is a room that, someday hopefully we can get into, and maybe stuff in there on Northwood.
But we
Maybe
do-
more stuff on the cut.
But let me just say this though, because we had multiple trips to Harrisburg, to the state archives, and we have the microfilm files on all of the whole building of the Philadelphia and Columbia Railroad. There is nothing on, except that there is the contract for the mile of railroad, and then there's a record of the giving out of that contract in the local press, in the county archives. But we found, there was a record on Duffy's Cut in the archives in Harrisburg. There was no record on what happened in what became Northwood in those microfilm records.
Now, those are just the contracts though, and comments.
And
you know,
reports.
Occasional comments, but they're, yeah, those are the Canal Commission reports and the Canal
Yes.
Commission contracts. There may be a whole other category of documentation down at 30th Street that we haven't seen.
Yeah, it's just that this one, you know, the work was done. At Duffy's Cut, the work wasn't finished by the time these poor men and the woman were murdered. So by the time they were murdered, there was still another almost year of work that had to be done to complete the work at Duffy's Cut. So, and that we have record of too, that the work continued
That was
into
the
the next
McCartney
year.
brothers. The finishing of that mile was actually done by Protestant crew, brothers John and James McCartney from County Down. And so the sectarian aspect of work back in Ireland at the time, Catholics were very largely excluded from the industrial workforce, as it existed in Belfast, largely in the dockyards.
We have
But they
ads in
worked
the
at the
paper, though.
bottom. They
We have
worked at
ads in
the-
the paper
they
where we
worked-
hired locals to finish.
They worked at, no, they were, John James McCartney finished it. J&J McCartney finished it.
That is the tunnel.
And no, they finished the track up top.
Alright, so
They
the
finished
bottom,
the track up top.
so the
reality of
bottom line is
situation
though, that there were ads in the newspaper hiring locals to finish the work after the men at Duffy's Cut died.
It was done actually by the McCartney brothers. Here's the thing though, so that was not something that was in the Canal
Twins.
Commission reports. Okay, that was something during the years that Corona hit and we had to work from home, and all of a sudden, we opened up some files that we had, and all of a sudden the work trail of the McCartney brothers became apparent. One of those guys, obviously the finishing of the culvert that he referenced, that Frank referenced, but they finished up top a year later, and it was Protestant workers of the McCartney brothers who were unaffected by the cholera epidemic, by the violence that happened there, whereas Duffy's guys were the ones who got hit.
And that
So
thing
there is a
is-
sectarian aspect. to
Yes,
this.
but the local papers advertised looking for workers, and they claimed that it was healthy, that there were no diseases, it was a great environment, you get good wages and so forth.
And the contract went to the McCartney.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. I'm just saying that they advertised this because the work was not completed. The difference is, at Peter Connor's mile, the work was completed. And
because
that's
they
all
didn't
I'll
have to-
say.
they didn't
That's
have to
all I
build a
will say.
fill.
That the work was completed before they were
didn't have to dig
murdered.
out a cut and build a fill,
Yes.
which is a very straight.
So the work was
mile.
completed before these guys, or right around the time these other ones were murdered.
They didn't have to pay them then.
Yes.
I don't think either of those crews got a dime
Yes.
one in the end.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, it's probably the case that there were other miles had similar circumstances, but with, less of a paper trail.
Another question?
Yes. I've lived in East Whiteland 40-plus years.
Oh, it's Blowhard Bob.
My first house, I probably used to walk by Duffy's Cut, but Duffy's Cut didn't really exist. It's 35 years ago or so. And now I'm out here. I've always found it frustrating that, there's this great project, a lot of historical stuff, it's interesting, it's worthwhile, and all this stuff, it gets a decent amount of publicity, but yet it's illegal to go down there. I find that frustrating. Do you
Why?
think you're gonna find the same thing with Northwood, that you'll have some kind of a conclusion of something, but yet no one will be allowed to go there?
Well, I think there'll be we're gonna try to get across there, so it'll be more like West Laurel Hill in that regard. But Bob did the deed descent actually on the property there. You wanted to address it?
Yeah, and I mean, wherever you're talking about, whether it's at Duffy's Cut or whether it's at Northwood Cemetery, it's on property that somebody owns. Duffy's Cut, Amtrak owns the corridor. The homeowners association from the nearby housing development owns a chunk of that valley. So it's really not us telling people to keep out, it's us telling people to, respect the wishes of the homeowner, or the property owner here, is what it amounts to, because I couldn't do that at Duffy's Cut or Northwood Cemetery any more than I could tell somebody to, you have free access to this gentleman's property, if you want it, and check it out, look around, whatever. So we're just trying to respect the property owner's wishes so that we can continue to do what we need to do to continue this investigation. And it is frustrating, I understand what you're saying.
It's not really frustrating. It's a great gift that people have allowed you to look for this. It's not a right for us to go there, and we need to respect that, because the rights could be taken away for you to continue your work, and that's more important than us seeing a patch of ground.
You know what's cool too, though, is the historical marker would actually, if the Duffy's Cut historical marker is actually in a location where the laborers probably traipsed up and down that hill in that area all the time. So the fascinating thing is that the historical marker is on a site that would have been connected with the lives and possibly the deaths of the men and the women who were buried there. So there is a sense in which anytime you look at that marker, you're looking at sacred ground for the story of what happened at Duffy's Cut, in my opinion.
How big of an area up in Northwood do you think you're talking about? And I was, part B to that question would be like, would it be possible if like the word were to get out and it would become a problem to erect like a temporary like cyclone cage over the area or something?
Yeah, that's one of the things I mentioned was it's, at some point when we get into this, we'll post it, like no trespassing. But the problem with like fencing and things that are kind of ostentatious is it attracts attention to it. You know, so really I think we'd like to post it, number one, to communicate that this area is not open for anybody to just walk into. But if somebody does walk into it with intent and knowingly, you know, intentionally to do something, to, you know, try to dig remains up or something, that if you catch them, you can prosecute them.
And no, the groundskeeper today, unlike the previous groundskeeper, does not live on the property. So
Correct.
there's not somebody there,
Correct.
in theory, 24/7 the way there used to be.
That's true.
It's a
The
pretty
old-
secluded area. I
the old
mean, the
caretaker's
Downingtown police
house.
are not going to patrol up there.
Right, and
on
it's
a
not,
routine basis.
there's like Bill said, that there's no grave sites really very close to that. So if you were going to visit a grave site, it's not like you would be doing that and then say, oh, hey, what's down in that area with all the trees cut down? You know, you probably wouldn't do that. So if you went out there for any purpose whatsoever, it would be to, you know, do something you weren't supposed to do.
And how
What's-
big is the area?
I'm gonna say, it's like, I mean,
An acre?
well, literally the area we're excavating is probably about the size of 3 vans, side by side.
But the
Yeah.
whole
It's pretty
area
small.
itself is, I mean, and it's not easy, it's really not that easy to get to. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it would.
Yeah, it's steep. We have that on our side.
Yes.
A lot of people go to that cemetery to walk. Nobody's walking their dog down there.
No. See, and that helps,
Yeah,
because,
it does.
yeah, cause it's not gonna be befouled or, you know, really, yeah.
Yeah, I don't anticipate any issues.
It's a good question though, because the thing is, and all these are good questions, because we really don't, you know, that was a concern at Duffy's Cut. You know, people were arrested in the valley at Duffy's Cut looking for artifacts. It was
The
crazy.
Animal Society promised they'd bail us out, but.
So
never
one
came to
night,
that.
we were there at night one time, I forget what we were there for, but the police showed up. So we showed our ID, our Duffy's Cut ID, you remember that? And then they said, oh, could you please show us the site, show us the site, so, but, you know, we
That
were
was
not.
after we mentioned names.
Yes,
Bob
of
McAllister,
course.
Matt Gordon.
So we weren't arrested, looking at our own site.
And we had the permission of the homeowners to be down there that night.
Yeah.
And still someone called the cops and they showed up and, and Bob started running towards the tracks and away from the cops. And we said, Bob,
No.
go towards the cops. That was funny.
Don't run towards them, but just stand still and okay.
That's how you make the news when you run away.
I live on Summit, and I'm the
Yes.
one, I've
Yes.
met you a couple of times, I used to send my kids out in the woods, oh, go look for bones, you know, keep them busy.
Did you live on Broadleaf Trail or the area before you got there into
Yeah,
the?
but what my point here is, that development went in, how did that development go in if they knew that site was there?
See, well,
It was folklore, it
Yeah.
was more folklore, there were some publications, newspaper pieces that talked about it
In the
before.
1950s.
But
They were
nothing
more
current,
fiction.
and it was folklore.
No, it was urban legend to
No,
people.
We had the railroad record of what
I
happened.
mean, there are no
after our
houses
grandfather.
right on, Doug's got on the site, it rings the site.
Yeah.
And those houses there were the first ones that went
But
into
you
the
said
condo.
they owned the land.
Amtrak owns the land.
Oh, I
So,
thought you
yeah,
said
Amtrak
housing
owns-
Yeah,
development
so they have the
owned land.
Amtrak owns it right away, and then they own the land where the site is
That is
located.
Amtrak owns the land.
Amtrak,
Yeah,
that's what I said,
Bob got
Amtrak.
the tax map, that shows definitively that, the fear we had for all those years of trespassing was
Yeah.
unwarranted.
Yeah. And we live in Chester County, wherever we live, there's a good chance we're on top of some burial ground for somebody, really, you know, yeah.
Yeah, so there were people, was it Brian Racich? Brian Racich?
Brian Racious,
Yeah.
I hooked you up with.
Yes, so he told us the story about the, back in the day, finding bones and also being haunted by those bones. And we have there's one video on our Duffy's Cut website here that
Horseman?
that
Going
has.
down Summit?
Yeah.
How long have you lived on Summit?
40
Oh, okay.
years.
43 years. Wow.
So, but he had a story of finding bones, you know, with his colleagues back, his juvenile colleagues, you know. where-
So who
where
mentioned
all-
about the AME church?
Me.
Okay, so, this, at Northwood, around Northwood?
No, the
There's
one he's-
another
Okay.
cemetery there.
Because
Yeah, so
we
there
have,
was-
we have a record of the African American, or the African church as it was called in 1880, and its location related to Northwood Cemetery. If anybody wants to look at that, it's up.
Lindley Hill is just north of it.
Well, we had a 2016 NEH Teachers Summer Institute here for Duffy's Cut. We had the bus driver get us to other cemeteries, and that was one of the cemeteries that we went to.
And I went with you with some of your teachers then, because remember I
Yeah,
took
That's the
pictures.
one, yeah, that's the one, yep.
Yep.
Any other questions?
Just an FYI, the construction office that was set up for the railroad, it was located just south of Duffy's Cut.
Oh.
And it was actually, they rented rooms in a store, the building's still there, it's a private home now.
Is that so?
Yeah,
Wow,
on a
okay.
corner of East Lancaster Avenue and Euclid. There used to be a store and the railroad was located there for several years during construction.
Fascinating.
Up near Marchwood area, huh?
No,
No?
just
The
right
other end
on,
of-
right on Route 30 in Downingtown.
Closer to Exton.
And Route 113 is Euclid Avenue,
Downingtown.
right in Downingtown.
I got you.
Right across from East Ward School, I'm sorry.
Is it the antiques, that antiques?
Right across from that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
We're gonna take a look at that.
Yeah.
That's
Across 113 from that?
Across 113, yeah.
That is very cool.
The interesting
See,
thing
we're
out
still
there-
learning. See, the thing is, you know, there's so much more to learn about this.
But the interesting thing too about the curvature of the tracks at Duffy's Cut changed a lot. You know, the Sugartown curve had to be lessened, whereas out in Downingtown, that really hasn't changed. The track line is the same, and the station is about the same spot.
And the engineer during that time, name escapes me, he actually owned Northwood
Oh, really?
for afterwards.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I'm trying to piece things together
Oh,
now.
I
So
like
it-
that.
So it does appear there might be a connection between the railroad and Northwood, the property.
And we wouldn't be talking about any of this if it wasn't for you guys. So thank you.
You mentioned joining your team. Do you plan to have any digs that you would need volunteers?
It could be in time. This is actually a much tighter spot. It was about 10 times as big overall. But this is a much tighter spot than it was at the cut. So, it's gonna be predicated on, you know, the amount of, labor that we've got and compared against the amount of space that we have. So right now, it's pretty tight.
But it's good to know that there is support and there would be people who would
Yeah.
have that kind of an interest.
Yeah, this is a different, you know, this, again, is about the size of 3 vans, I would say, about right.
That's what we're looking at.
Side
right
by
now.
side.
Question back
Much
there.
tighter than at the cut.
Is there a location that people can go to find out how to donate monetarily for
Yeah,
your
it's the
project?
Duffy's Cut website.
It is on there?
Through, you know, it's duffyscutproject.com. And we would greatly appreciate any assistance in that regard. I mean, we were floored about the DNA costs. I mean,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
That's insane. I
And
mean,
then they wanted us to pay for a geneticist to come, to fly them from Central Europe to Ireland
Yeah.
and back, and it was like,
Yeah.
what?
To Hungary, right?
So, yeah,
Hungary,
Central
yeah.
Europe to Ireland and back, so it's just, it was so prohibitive. Now, the thing is, if we do have an American company that would be interested in this, doing a fundraiser would be magnificent.
We begged, I mean, over the years, I mean, we've gotten,
We talked to Ancestry, we
Yeah.
talked to 23andMe.
Nat Geo back when they were doing DNA, but nobody's, it's just too expensive. I mean, there is a Penn DNA lab. I don't think they wanna do anything for free, you know.
They can't.
so-
They've lost a lot of their funding. But you could do a separate crowdfunding campaign for the DNA
That'd be
that would be
fantastic.
donor specific.
And then Matt knows the whole procedure is to take the teeth and, Ryan, you wanna tell everybody about that?
About there is a grinding machine actually that it grinds away unnecessary parts of the tooth, and we have saved a tooth from every set of remains that we could. But then you look at it under a microscope, and while you're looking at it under the microscope, you extract this mitochondrial DNA, and then you analyze it the same way for repeating patterns of gene sequences just the way you do with nuclear DNA. The only issue is you lose half the lineage. You can only follow it through the female lineage.
Yeah, no, forensic dentistry is actually fascinating. They use that after ground zero, et cetera.
They sure did.
Yeah, it'd be ideal. I mean, that'd be our, that'd be on our bucket list, no question about that.
Well, I know you're not Mr. Tech, but I think, and I'm not saying that to be.
No, I get you.
Who are you talking to?
But I think it would be worth your while to
Yeah,
try a crowdfunding, one of those crowdfunding
Yeah.
sites.
And that would be our key on that, of course, you know.
I'd have to call my daughter, because I know what I've been trained to do, but I don't know about, I don't know how to set up a crowdfunding account, but.
No, that would really make
Neither
sense.
do I, I've just seen
My
them.
daughter to help.
I mean, that would be insane too. These two sites, if there were any people, like the one guy who ran west from the cut to infect the crew out at mile 48, was he related to someone there? You know, running from mile 59 to mile 48?
It's not unlikely. There, if you looked at the ship register, from that brought the crew to Duffy's Cut, the John Stamp, there were a number of folks who were related to each other. There were brothers, there were folks who are linked together. We're not 100% sure, but what their connection is. There were some, there was a father-in-law and a daughter-in-law, you know.
It's
Catherine
Catherine Burns, yeah.
So it's interesting, you know, we don't know who it was who fled west to infect the crew at mile 40.
But that's another thing too, yeah, so one of the dead at Downingtown is one of the men from Duffy's Cut.
Well, and also,
Do you have a name?
when this story
We don't.
grows legs in Ireland, when it breaks over there, to follow on at Northwood.
Yeah.
And like at Duffy's Cut, you know, John Ruddy's remained, there was a dental anomaly there in his jaw that Matt discovered, and it's like so rare that when the story broke in Ireland, a family said, hey, we have that.
And it was the Ruddy family.
The names matched up on the ship's list.
Yeah, from Donegal.
You know, and then Catherine Burns, you know, we had a table full of bone fragments, and a forensic archaeologist from Penn walked into the room, pointed at one and said, what was a female doing at that site?
Yeah.
And again, shiplet Catherine Burns, and you know, it all came together through, you know, the story spreading out further.
So we're
globally.
excited.
Yeah.
We're excited. We're hoping to find things like this at Northwood as well.
I used to work for UPS, and in 1988, I started my career as a UPS driver in West Conshohocken at the Four Falls Corporate Center. Now, when I came onto the scene, it was a construction of a building. This building is so close to the Schuylkill Expressway, you think you could reach out of your car window and touch it.
There used to be an inn
But
there.
at the time I came on, it was an Indian burial ground, and it was a full archaeological dig. There was no construction going on at the time in 1988. And for like the first year there, my customers weren't the businesses that were going in there, it was the archaeological. So, who do you think funded something like that? Because what happened was they found Indian bones, construction immediately ceased, and it became an archaeological dig for several years. And then once they got everything out of it, then they could continue with the building. In Downingtown, over near the STEM Academy, there's Race Street. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but there's some townhouses there that are about 17 years old now, and the Historical Commission at the time, there were members of there who were trying to block the building of those townhouses, because we didn't have any solid proof, but there was some something said that they think that there was a Revolutionary War redoubt there, which isn't the same level as, you know, bodies or anything like that, but I mean, isn't there anything that says, you know, we need to put some government dollars into this? And I know we're cutting things now, and we're not.
Yeah, I mean, so like the Amtrak and PennDOT have archaeologists on hand, you know, so government money goes into some of this stuff. But we had experience with the Philadelphia Archaeology Forum guys. So when we found remains at Duffy's Cut, Some of those guys thought it was a kind of turf issue, and that they should have been brought in, and.
Of course they
you know,
did.
It was like, wait a minute, Marshall Beck, remember all that stuff?
We had to defend our approach with our own experts one time. I won't
You
say
remember
where.
that, Matt?
Oh, boy, did
Oh,
I ever.
God, it was a
Wow,
wild.
yeah. It was wild
It
and
was,
wacky.
yeah, so there are turf issues, but there, a lot of these archaeologists also, you ever see read the novel, The Relic, or see the movie, The Relic? You know, about the cutthroat nature of,
Preston
getting
and China,
grants,
they-
yeah,
No,
getting,
but I
getting
love it.
grants, you know.
Pendergast series, volume 1 of the Pendergast series.
Yeah, so there.
Incredible.
So, there's a lot of truth in the, subplot in there about the competitive nature of grant getting.
Well, and academia.
It's like, yeah, some people just live by grants, you know, we all have other jobs, but we do this
Matt
as a
Pease
passion.
Yeah,
yeah.
does this professionally, you know?
What exactly?
Well, grants, you know, and
Dealing
you
with-
work for US Radar, so it's.
Yeah, my main, task is that I run technical customer support at US Radar. We manufacture the ground penetrating radars, but I am an archaeologist. And a lot of, you know, especially with certain companies, they hire, cultural resource management companies. There's a bunch in this area. So I live in New Jersey, and, you know, Richard Grubb and Associates is the big one. There's also Hunter. And then basically, a business will hire them, a company will hire them to do research for them, before they build a new building. So like if they were to be putting in a building over there, they'd have to, you know, they would do the research, they would, you know, do some test pits, do some thing, if they find anything, if they don't, sometimes if they just find a few things. I had one professor, I was an undergrad, they found an arrowhead, but that was really it. They found one arrowhead, and that's not enough to not build here, so they ended up building a small shopping center.
Where's it located?
Right on Hooper Avenue.
Oh my,
The
where
one
the
that-
mall is.
The one that's, well, no, down more though. On the border of Brick.
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm sorry, the border of Silverton and Brick.
Okay.
Right by Church Road, and
Yeah.
actually, an old church right next to it. You walk
Yes,
out
yes.
from getting a haircut, and there's a cemetery right over there, right over there.
Right, it's now an extermination company. I think.
That's what the church is.
Yeah,
Across the
good
road,
Lord.
there's a new shopping
They
center.
turned a church into to an exterminator's office.
Nice.
I have about
Issue with
30
that.
something years.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
But this is the thing, so there are protocols for some of this, and some things would work, but, you know, in this case, you know, we have a discrete site that's really, we really, I don't think, you know, as long as we post it, I think we'll be all right where we are.
Yeah, I think so, yeah,
Yeah.
and just kind of keep it as low profile, you
Mhm.
know.
Yeah.
As I understand it, what you're saying is that there is a crew of between 100 and 150 people working there.
100 to 120 usually is
Okay.
tops, yeah.
Is that the number of bodies that you think there are?
We're thinking there could be. It's like at Duffy's Cut, we knew there was half of a work crew, and that came from the railroad sources themselves and so on. But at Northwood, it could be an entire work crew, could be 100 to 120 graves.
Now, that would be ideal, you know,
Yeah.
at
But-
the cut, so at Duffy's Cut, there were, I mean, ideal for the poor victims. At Duffy's Cut, the way the bodies were oriented within the fill, there was a gully going down near the fill that took away some of the right limbs of several of the buried victims.
Especially the arms, the right arms were.
Yeah, the right legs,
Washed
right
away.
arms, and so at Northwood, where we've found these bones, it is in a gully. I mean,
That's all you need to say.
yeah, but
Okay.
so there, yeah, but I mean, it could have, yeah. Unfortunately, there's potential for more remains to be washed away.
Yes,
At
yes.
Northwood. I mean.
And the
it's
thing is, there's a
literally right in the
road
middle
that
of
was
the
put
gully.
in underneath it, you know, a road that.
So we don't know. We don't know how many-
We're-
we don't know how many we're gonna
Time will
find.
tell, and ideally, we
Found
could
one.
find, yeah. Another question?
We know the locals were at the time prejudiced against the workers. Were they welcoming the railroad completely, or like, you know?
Half and half. Those who got contracts from the railroad benefited financially, you know, the homeowners who had to fence off their property, they received money from the railroad for that, and we have contracts from that too. But, I mean, those locals also complained about the destruction of some of their property, and there are court cases related to that. So, they were
Yeah, there's-
ambivalent at times.
Yeah, there's I mean, one of the things is the 1829 village record It mentions Duffy's work at mile 60, which is the one just to the west of Duffy's Cut, towards Bailey. And it says that the disrespect of the property rights of owners near the tracks by the workers has led to violent riots in some parts of the country. And so we expect that there's a lot of people who didn't want this newfangled technology coming through their property.
It was untested, you know, it was untested in that area.
But it was also, you know, they thought a violation of their rights as property owners.
Yes.
Was there eminent domain being used?
Yeah, I mean, you
Okay.
had to put the fence up between your property and the rail line. So some people really, you know, were opposed to that.
You had a contract for that, you received a contract.
Yeah, I mean, you had to do it, I mean, there was no option. The railroad said, it's the Canal Commission.
Yeah.
Actually, they ran the railroad and the canals. And, so the Canal Commission says, we need this to be as straight as possible, goes through your property, so be it. And there were a lot of people who resented that.
When the survey was done, you know, to put the canal and rail link in, you know, people knew it was coming. It was done years before the railroad, the first track of the railroad was laid, they knew that. So, they had a lot of time to stir up angry emotions. You know?
Yeah, disorders and riots in some parts of the country, that's the quote in the 1829 newspaper.
Okay.
All right, anything else? Because there are snacks, there's
Yeah, everyone